Hi, in this video you will learn about conditional statements in Python. I am Praveen, an online instructor at codewithpraveen.com. First we will see what are conditional statements in a programming language. Next we will look at different types of conditional statements supported in Python. Finally, we will write some examples in Visual Studio Code for the Python language. Okay, let's get started. Conditional statements are programming language constructs which informs the compiler or an interpreter to perform a specific action based on some conditions. Take for example a typical program structure. If we assume this block signifies a sample Python program, then the interpreter executes them one after the other in a sequential manner. As you can see, it's a pretty simple program structure. Now consider the next example where you have certain block of code which needs to be executed only if certain condition is met. Then we use the if statements, which is the primary conditional constructs in Python. What happens in this case is the interpreter executes one after the other, then it sees that there is an if condition. It tries to execute this condition. If it is true, then this set of statements are executed, and then the program continues the further execution. Say for example, if this condition fails, what happens in that case? This entire block of code is skipped. Basically, the execution becomes something like this. This code gets executed in the block, then it comes to this condition. Since the condition fails, it directly comes to this section of a block to continue the further execution. This is a very simple block using the if statements. Let's move to the next type. This is called as if-else statements. Basically what happens is, as the name tells, if certain condition is satisfied, then a block gets executed. Otherwise, the other block gets executed. Why do we require this else part? It might be your criteria that if certain condition is there, then you want to execute certain instructions. If it's not satisfied, then you want to handle it in a different manner. In all these situations, these if-else constructs are very useful. Typically in a real-world programming, the if-else programming constructs are often used and very popular among all the programmers. They are very simple to use and it provides a very powerful programming construct for any programming language. So in this example, if the interpreter starts execution, it flows something like this. It goes through each statement in this block one after the other. Then it checks that it's an if condition. Then it tries to execute this, and if the condition is true, then it executes this set of statements inside this block, and then it continues directly to the next statements within present in this block. Suppose if this condition fails for some reason, then the flow directly comes to this block, which is referred to as else block. After the execution of the statements in this block, then it continues with the usual block. So to summarize, the condition is executed, and if satisfies, this block gets executed. Otherwise, this block gets executed and the program continues as usual. Let's look at different variation of the if-else statements. As you can see here, it looks very similar to the previous example. We have an if statement, a condition, and this block gets executed for if this condition gets satisfied. And then we have a similar block and we have a similar condition and we have a different word called else if. What happens is the compiler or the interpreter executes this condition. If it satisfies, then it executes this block. Otherwise, it comes to this statement else if. So we are checking another condition over here. It usually is a different condition compared to here. Once this condition is executed and if it is true, then this block gets executed. Then finally the usual program continues in the final block. Let's see one more time how it flows. These statements gets executed one after the other. Then we see the if keyword. Then this condition gets executed, and if it is true, it comes here. If suppose this condition fails, if it goes to this else if keyword and this condition is executed, and if this is true, then this block gets executed. Finally, it continues with this block. Now what happens if the conditions fails or they return false? So in this case, if this condition fails, then it comes over here. If even this condition fails, then it directly comes over to this section. So in such cases, both these blocks are not executed because both these conditions have been false, and hence these blocks are skipped altogether by the interpreter. Let's see the final variation of if statements. This is called as if else statements. Here we have a typical if condition, else if condition, and we have added the else part as a final structure here. So if you notice, we have three different blocks of code which needs to be executed based on certain conditions. This combines all the three keywords we have seen so far among the if statements supported by Python. They are if, else if, or else. Note that the else doesn't have any conditions. It means that the interpreter executes one after the other. Then if this condition is succeeded, this block gets executed. Else it checks for this condition. If it satisfies, these blocks get executed. If suppose both these condition fails, then the final block gets executed. Note that if either of these condition is satisfied and executed, that is either this block or this block, then the else block is entirely skipped because the previous condition has already been satisfied and their respective block of statements has been executed. Irrespective of which block gets executed, the program continues once they are done. Let's move on to write some examples for the if statements in Python using Visual Studio Code. Let's write a simple Python program to see the usage of if statements and its variations. Let's take a simple problem statement. Let's assume we have a phone model stored in a variable called phone model. We will check the value of this variable against various possibilities and then print based on its value. Let's start with the simple case, the first one, namely if statement. Let's assume the variable as phone model. So we are assigning the default value as iPhone to begin with. So we use the if statement, namely if phone model equal to iPhone, print I got an iPhone. This is the most simple if condition for using the Python language. So basically we have one variable called phone model which stores what model of the phone you have. Then we use the if statement. You see the syntax of the if statement. We have the if keyword, then we have the variable name, and we are using the comparative operator, and we are checking against certain value. So this entire line becomes a condition. If condition colon statements. In this example, we just have one line, but you can have multiple statements inside this if block. Let's see what happens when you execute this program. As expected, you see we got the statement I got an iPhone because the variable contains the value iPhone and this condition gets satisfied and it returns true. So if condition satisfies, which is true in this case, this prints. Now let's see what happens if I change it. Samsung. Now let me execute. You see it's blank because the interpreter comes here, it tries to compare, is the phone model equal to iPhone? In this case, no, we have Samsung. So this statement gets skipped. Okay, let's say I need to now check for a Samsung model. So one way is to check phone model equals Samsung, print, I got Samsung model. I got a Samsung phone. Okay, now let's execute it. So as you can see, you got now Samsung phone. So basically now what happens is, it tries to first comes line by line, phone model is equal to Samsung, then it execute this one, phone model equals iPhone, no. So this statement block gets skipped. Now next this gets executed, phone model equals Samsung, yes. Then this statement gets executed and we see the print. Now although this program segment looks good, but it's not a best programming practice. You will see why that's the reason after a short while. Let's move on to the next type, if else. We can use the same source code and try to convert a bit by using these two if conditions and merging them together with an else condition. Let's see how to do it. Sample program to use if else statements. To just save some time, let me copy the entire source code. Put it here. We had to close the comments. Okay. So now this pretty much is the same code which you have seen in the top. Now a better approach to use in this case is to use if else condition, because we have two if conditions which is checking on the same variable. So best programming practice is to use if else. So can remove this now. So now this looks better compared to this. If phone model equals iPhone, we print an iPhone. Else we print it's a Samsung phone. Now let's see what happens if we execute this program. We get Samsung, which is coming from the initial segment if. This comes from a if else statement, which is referring to here. Now let's see what happens if we set the phone model as iPhone in case of if else condition. Phone model equals iPhone. Now let's execute it. So now we got a Samsung phone, got an iPhone. So this is coming from the initial if condition. This comes from the next segment which uses if else. So the programs comes here, phone model equals iPhone. It checks against iPhone, gets executed. Then the print gets executed. Now since it is an if else condition logic, once the if block statements is completed, it goes to the next. It doesn't execute the else part. If you remember, I was telling you that this kind of statements is not a good program practice because we are using the same variable against various checks using two different if. The reason being, say what happens if tomorrow you write some if else condition, something like this. Some other model. Now your intention is if it's an iPhone, then print the iPhone. If it's Samsung, then Samsung, else some other model. The programmer might make a mistake, especially if he's a beginner, that this else part applies only for this if condition, not for this, which is not what he might have intended in the first place. So it's always recommended that if you are having something on these lines using the same variable to two different blocks, better to write an if else condition. Let's move on to the third type where we try to use if, else if using the programming logic. Now let's go back and try to use this code and convert into using else if keyword. So let me copy the same sample program to use if elif. So in this case, I just replace the else with else if phone model equals Samsung. So if you see, this source code is almost same as the previous one, except that we have removed the else and replaced it with elif. So if you execute this program, so we get, I got an iPhone, so which is coming from here. So if you change it to Samsung, I got a Samsung phone. So if the interpreter comes here, checks against here, it doesn't satisfy, elif phone model equals Samsung, yes, it prints. Let's put everything together and write one single block code covering if, elif, else statements. So let me copy it again. This is going to be the final block of code. Sample program to use if, elif, else statements. So let the phone model be Samsung to begin with. If phone model equals iPhone, print iPhone. If it's Samsung, print Samsung. Say I want to compare just one more. Say Windows, which obviously doesn't exist. You don't exist. You missed the semicolon. So we have else if. For the completion, let's put an if else part, which is the final one. It's impossible because most of the phones are either iPhone, Samsung or Windows, just in this example. So this one completes the final segment where we use if, elif, else. Let's see what happens if we try to change phone model to say Nokia. So let's execute, and as expected, you see we get it's impossible. So what basically happens is we assign the value to phone model as Nokia. It tries to compare against each of these statements one after the other till it matches. It's iPhone? No. Samsung? No. It's Windows? No. So it's impossible. Just to do one more check, go to Windows. Don't exist.